I'm Suzanne DeRoche, Deputy Director for Energy and Infrastructure at the New York City Office of Resiliency and the Office of Sustainability. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our policy goals and what we're doing to meet some of those goals and targets. So the city has set a very ambitious goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. And we look at that across a number of lenses, not just greenhouse gas reduction, but also how do we build a resilient and affordable energy system. So I just want to set a little bit of context here so folks understand what the challenges that we have. So if we look at New York State here on the right, when we look at our greenhouse gas emissions, about 45% are from buildings, but 36% from transportation and waste and agriculture making up the remainder. But in New York City, we're a dense urban environment with a great public transit system. Our buildings are a huge part of our greenhouse gas emissions. And you just heard from Rebecca all of the things that we're doing with our own buildings in order to really tackle that energy efficiency and greenhouse gas mitigation issue. And then out of the building stock here in New York City, almost 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions comes from the electricity used in those buildings. The rest is from on-site combustion of fossil fuels, mainly for heat and hot water. So a little bit different in terms of what the goals that the state is trying to do and what the goals that New York City are trying to achieve, just based on where the emissions are coming from. So I focus a lot on our energy supply, our bulk supply, and how do we get that to be carbon neutral, which is a very high goal. You can see here in 2018, the electricity we consumed in New York City was majority fossil fuel, followed by nuclear and then some hydro and renewables. However, our main nuclear power plant will be closing in 2022. And so you can see in 2022 that our fossil fuel mix is now up to about 86%. Some models show it as high as 90. So really, this is a challenging issue specifically for New York City. And I'll talk a little bit about some of our solutions there. So across these three pillars, we look at how can we utilize the space in New York City to increase distributed resources, mainly in the city, that's solar and batteries. And then what can we do to incentivize energy efficiency in the private sector, as well as on top of what we're doing in the public sector. And I won't talk too much about this today in the interest of time, but also how do we make these changes while increasing our resiliency to the impacts of climate change. So the first thing I'll talk about is energy efficiency. The city passed a landmark set of green bills in 2019 called the New York City Climate Mobilization Act. Two tenets of that bill was Local Law 97. This one, for folks and tracking what's happening in the US, was a really big deal. We basically set a cap for large buildings on their greenhouse gas emissions, and then we will just decrease it over time. The first cap is in 2025, followed by a cap in 2030, and then subsequently on a 5-year cycle, those caps will decrease. So this is really the one of the main ways that you're gonna see that decrease in the building sector in terms of our emissions. We followed that and the same package of bills with a way to finance that is better for the building stock and better for owners. So we established PACE financing through Local Law 96. And this allows low-cost, clean energy financing that stays with the building rather than the owner. So it comes through essentially a tax function. And so that allows ownership of buildings to be passed on while still having financing that allows for clean energy projects. And then the last piece of this is what we call the New York City Retrofit Accelerator. This program has been going for a number of years. And it's a service that the city provides to building owners to basically connect them to technical services and incentives that exist to try to do energy efficiency in their buildings. Also passed in the Mobilization Act was Local Law 9294. This requires solar or a green roof or both on all new construction in New York City, regardless of the building size. So again, trying to aggressively move towards some of these targets you can see. We're trying to reach 1,000 megawatts of solar by 2030. We have a little over 200 megawatts now. So we think we're well on our way, and this bill will really help push that, push towards those targets. We need this solar on buildings. We mainly see that as a way of decreasing demand from the buildings, not necessarily as part of our bulk supply strategies, but really to ensure that those buildings are using less of the grid power. The other piece is ensuring that we have a lot of battery storage. Some modeling across the state right now has close to 10 gigawatts of of storage installed in New York City. It's a lot of battery storage to offset some of what is coming with offshore wind here on the East Coast. So we're really trying to ensure that the public and the development community understands how to permit storage in such a dense urban environment. You know, there are, with lithium-ion batteries, there are safety concerns from a first responders, firefighter perspective. So we've been pushing out permitting guidance for the last couple of years to really try to ensure that that industry understands how to do business here in New York City. Another tool that we have for the development community is our community energy planning online mapping tool. And essentially, I'm just going to flip to the next slide here. This gives you, from the development community, a perspective on where we think certain technologies will work in the 5 boroughs. So what we're looking at here is the ground source heat pump feasibility on a block basis. And then we have all of these other categories like energy cost burden. So this is how much of folks' paycheck is going to their energy bill. And what you see here in the darker blue, that means those folks are paying well beyond our target. And so their energy costs are really eating up a lot of their expendable income. So we overlay that with solar as a way to show the development community that these would be good places for people to really take advantage of low-cost solar to help decrease their bills. So this is a public tool, and you know, if you just Google New York City Community Energy Planning Tool, it'll pop right up. Feel free to ask questions about that later. The last thing that I'll talk about is how do we get the bulk system to be greener in New York City. So what you're seeing here is a map of New York State. Those red dots are places where we have transmission congestion. So the upstate grid above those dots is really clean. In some places, 80–85% clean. But that can't get through these bottlenecks of transmission down to New York City, down at the bottom here. So these blue lines are modeled new transmission that we've taken a look at that will bring clean energy down into the downstate region. So we can harness the upstate onshore wind and hydropower, as well as the New York State's planned offshore wind. And we think that if you can see the numbers there on the side, if we get all of those resources, we can get to about a 60% clean electricity grid in 2030. Coming from a place in 2022 where we're at 85%, approximately 85% fossil, we think that that's doable. It's a short amount of time, but we don't have a lot of time to solve this climate crisis. So we're pushing hard to ensure that those transmission projects move forward quickly. So that's all I have today, Ben. I unfortunately am going to have to jump off in a few minutes, but if there are any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me. You see my email address right there.
Perfect. Thank you, Suzanne. And we will jump right into the next presentation. And Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I'm having a little trouble sharing. It says I cannot share maybe till Suzanne is not sharing. Aha, that might work. Okay.
Is that working? Sorry about that.
No problem. Let's see what happens. Can we see this?
Yeah, it looks good.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm with the city's Department of Environmental Protection. And I'm going to talk quickly about what we're doing for energy and carbon neutrality. As both Suzanne and Rebecca mentioned, we are one of the agencies that are committed to these goals that are citywide. A little bit about DEP. We're the largest combined water and wastewater utility in the US. These are the stats of our staff and the scope of our work. We provide both clean drinking water and treat wastewater for all the 5 boroughs. I'm part of the Office of Energy and Resource Recovery Programs. This slide provides an overview of the work that our office does. We're a small group, but we have our hands in a number of things that have been discussed today. I personally focus on the resource recovery portion, biosolids, and the intersection of organics and energy production. We have these targets, as I mentioned, that many have talked about today, that we are examining how we can apply those to our work at DEP and what projects we will need to undertake in order to meet these targets. Our agency is actually the 2nd largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the city and the 3rd largest energy consumer. So we're a big part of the citywide goals. We realize that, but we also see that we're a large source of opportunity. In fact, some of the clean energy that Suzanne was mentioning upstate is from hydroelectric power installed in our watershed system where the city's clean water comes from. From a greenhouse gas reduction perspective, we have a 4-pronged strategy that overlaps with many of the concepts and technologies that have been talked about today. We're looking at conservation and efficiency on the demand side, finding ways on the supply side to make that supply greener, on-site energy generation using anaerobic digester gas is one of the largest parts of our strategy. Also looking at fuel switching and electrification. We do more traditional renewables as well. We have solar at a couple of our facilities and are looking to install more solar right now. We've taken a look at geothermal as well as sewer thermal on our effluent. And so this is an area, if there are folks who have technologies in this space, we'd be interested in learning more about them. And as mentioned, I'm focused on biosolids and the potential that that source has from a carbon perspective to be offsetting from our emissions when we manage to beneficially reuse those solids and get them back to land. So the vision for DEP is to become a sort of center in the circular economy by taking in discarded resources from the entire city and recovering various valuable elements from them, whether it's electricity, production of clean water, biosolids, as I mentioned, or even next generation products such as elemental phosphorus. Those are all things that we're looking at as part of our planning. Here's a few sample projects, a couple of them that I've mentioned. We do have cogeneration. We have 14 treatment plants dotted around the city. You can see them here on the map. 3 of them have cogeneration systems. The one highlighted here is at our North River plant, which is up here in Manhattan on the west side. And we're putting in 12 megawatts of cogeneration capacity at that facility. And then as the solar that I mentioned, this installation is a picture of one of our facilities Port Richmond in Staten Island. We have another installation on Wards Island. So we do have a distributed network of facilities with potential at many of them. And Newtown Creek is one of our more iconic facilities where these digester eggs live. We have 8 of them. They're 3 million gallons each, so a very large facility. And we are doing a number of innovative projects at that location, including a biogas to grid project and co-digestion of food waste for additional biogas production. I'll speak a little bit more about that food waste project because it's an area where we are hoping to see additional likely private investment or application of technology, particularly on this middle step that I've circled. And that is in order for us to co-digest organic feedstocks at our wastewater plants, they need to be pre-processed and cleaned up. So contamination needs to be removed and they need to be made into a slurry so that we can feed them in with our liquid waste stream. There's really only one company doing that here right now in the city, and that's Waste Management. So we're working with them, but obviously there's a lot more food waste that's out there and needs to be cleaned up, collected, and processed in order to harness the renewable energy that's embedded in it. Biosolids remains kind of my favorite thing, so I had to put in some specific information about this. And I did note in the prior presentation in the chat, there was a large discussion about biochar and making biochar out of biosolids. That's something that I'm watching very closely. There are 4 projects in the sort of tri-state area geography looking to install pyrolysis or gasification for the treatment of biosolids in particular. So there isn't any local production of biochar from biosolids yet, but there are a number of companies innovating in this space and trying to get it off the ground because it does create that renewable syngas energy as well as result in a large volume reduction. It's very interesting for the city because we make a tremendous amount of biosolids, about 1,400 wet tons a day or 50 to 60 truckloads. So this is something that we're taking a very close look at as part of our energy and carbon neutrality plan for the agency. And one of the goals that hasn't been talked about as much today, but is included in the citywide goals is a zero waste goal. And we've adapted that to our biosolids. So we're hoping that by 2030, we no longer have any biosolids going to landfills. So to sum up, we are working on an agency energy and carbon neutrality plan, so a roadmap of how we're going to achieve those goals. We're 1 year into this 3-year planning project, and that's going to take us out to 2050. This isn't our final product, but it's kind of a look forward as what we think might transition us to that place where we're meeting those greenhouse gas and energy neutrality goals by diversifying, sequestering, and implementing new technologies. So that's my information, and thanks for having me join y'all today.